So let me tell y'all what happened that night at Lakewood Arena in Houston. The hallway behind the stage was real quiet. Only sound was the crowd, like 50,000 folks singing and praising. But something wild was about to go down, something that would shake the whole church world. Pastor Benny Hinn, he was standing there fixing his white jacket, looking all calm. He had no idea that in just 1 minute, his whole ministry, 50 years of preaching and healing, was about to flip upside down. And it all started with 3 words Jesus done spoke about him just 3 days before. Now across the hall, there was this man, Jonathan Roumie. Y'all know him, the guy who played Jesus in that show, The Chosen. He was sitting with his head in his hands, looking like the weight of the world was crushing him. God had gave him a message, a big one, and he didn't want to be the one to say it. He prayed for 3 nights straight, asking God to pick somebody else. But the voice he heard, it was clear as day. Tell Benny Hinn his easy ministry days are over. Then the stage manager came on the earpiece. Y'all go and live in 60 seconds. As they walked toward the stage, Benny looked at Jonathan and saw something was off. Jonathan's hands was shaking, and his face was pale like he'd seen a ghost. Benny reached out and said, "Mr. Roumie, you look like you're carrying the whole world on your back." Jonathan looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "Pastor Hinn, what I'm about to say on that stage, it's the hardest thing I ever had to do." He said Jesus spoke to him 3 days ago about Benny. And the message? It was going to shake everything Benny thought he knew about his calling. Benny's heart skipped. He'd seen miracles and heard from God before. But this felt different. "What kind of message?" Benny asked, voice a little shaky. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. He said, "Pastor Hinn, in 35 days you're going to get a sign. A big one. So strong you won't be able to ignore it. And it's going to make you leave behind everything you built. You're going to follow God into something that's going to scare you." Then the crowd roared as Pastor Joel Osteen called him on stage. "Please welcome Benny Hinn and Jonathan Roumie." But folks had no idea what was coming. What Jonathan was about to say would change how people see God's plans forever. They sat down under them, bright stage lights. The air between Benny and Jonathan? It was thick, like something holy was hanging in the room. Joel smiled at the crowd, not knowing he was about to host one of the biggest spiritual moments ever. He said, "Tonight we got 2 men who've touched millions. Pastor Benny Hinn, with decades of healing ministry, and Jonathan Roumie, who played Jesus and helped folks feel close to Christ." Then Joel turned to Jonathan and asked, "How did playing Jesus change your faith?" Jonathan sat quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Benny and said, "What I'm about to say, it's way bigger than acting. 6 months ago, I thought I knew the line between pretending and real life. But that line vanished when God started speaking through me." The whole place went silent. He said, "Pastor Hinn, for a year now, I've been having dreams. Real ones. About real people and real things. I wrote down 28 of them, and every single one came true." Benny leaned in, eyes wide. He'd met folks who claimed visions before, but this felt different. Jonathan was shaken, voice cracked, but he kept going. He pulled out a beat-up leather journal. "This got all the dreams, all the details, all the proof, but nothing prepared me for what happened 3 nights ago." He said he was in his hotel room in LA, praying after a long day. He dropped to his knees, asking God, "Why me? Why now?" Then it happened. Jonathan said the room filled with a presence so strong he couldn't move. The air shimmered. And then he heard a voice, not just any voice, one that sounded like it came from forever. Benny's heart was pounding. He'd seen miracles, but this was something else. "What did the voice say?" Benny whispered. Jonathan looked at him, tears rolling down his cheeks. He said, "My son, you done played my earthly ministry well, but now I got a new calling for you. There's a man named Tufik Benedictus Hinn. Folks know him as Benny. His easy ministry season is over. He thinks he's serving me through crusades, but I'm calling him to serve through quiet sacrifice." The crowd gasped. Benny's face went pale. That name, Tufik Benedictus Hinn, was his birth name. Hardly anybody knew it. Benny stammered, "Jonathan, how'd you know my real name?" I ain't used it in over 40 years. Now listen close, 'cause this part right here, it's where things got real deep. Jonathan wasn't done talking. His voice got stronger, like he'd been holding this fire in his chest for days. He looked straight at Pastor Benny Hinn and said, "Pastor, the voice told me you spent years building this big ministry, preaching to millions, doing crusades, showing up on TV. But now," Jonathan said, "God's calling you out of the spotlight. He's asking you to give up everything you think makes you who you are." The cameras caught it all. Benny started shaking, holding tight to his chair. "This can't be," he whispered. "God don't just shut down ministries that reach millions." But deep down, Benny knew. He felt it in his spirit. This was truth. Truth that was about to flip his whole life. And then Jonathan said something wild. "Jesus told me exactly what kind of sacrifice you're going to make. It's big. So big, even a man who's seen thousands of miracles would struggle to say yes." The crowd was quiet. Real quiet. Benny was still trying to figure out how Jonathan knew his birth name. Tufik Benedictus Hinn. Hardly nobody knew that. But Jonathan kept going. "Pastor," he said, "I know this sounds crazy. When God first told me, I argued. I said, why me? But then he gave me details, stuff no person could ever know." Jonathan pulled out his old journal. His voice was calm but strong. 18 months ago, he said, "you was talking to your wife Suzanne in your study. You told her that even with all the miracles, something felt off. You said God was getting you ready for something new, something that'd take more faith than you ever had." Benny's face went pale. "That convo? It was private. Just him and Suzanne. Nobody else." "How do you know that?" Benny whispered, voice shaken. But Jonathan wasn't done. 2 weeks ago," he said, "you had a dream. You was praying in a cold concrete room. Folks around you was speaking a language you didn't know. You wasn't wearing your white suit, no big stage, just you on your knees, feeling closer to God than ever before." Benny started shaking hard. That dream? He never told a soul, not even Suzanne. "This is impossible," he said, barely able to speak. Jonathan looked at him with kind eyes and said, "Pastor Hinn, the voice told me you'd say those exact words. Now let me tell y'all what happened next." Jonathan wasn't done, not even close. He looked at Benny and said, "You gonna push back? You won't understand how I know what's deep in your heart. Stuff you ain't never said out loud." Even Pastor Osteen, who'd been quiet, finally spoke up. His voice was soft, respectful. "Jonathan, what you're saying, this ain't normal. Only God could know things like that." Jonathan nodded, tears rolling down his face. "That's why I didn't want to do this," he said. "I tried to run from it, but the voice kept speaking. It said Pastor Benny's been faithful with a lot. But now, God wants to trust him with something way bigger, something that'll cost him everything he's built. Just like Abraham had to leave all he knew." Benny looked out at the crowd, then back at Jonathan. "What's God asking me to give up?" he asked. "What could be greater than reaching millions through crusades?" That question, it felt like it echoed all the way to heaven. Jonathan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, his voice was heavy, like it was carrying eternity itself. "Pastor Hinn," he said, "I ain't never told this to nobody." Not once. But the voice spoke so clear, so strong, I'll never forget it. The whole crowd went quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jonathan said, "It was March 12th, 2025, 3:17 in the morning. I was praying in my hotel room when the whole place was filled with a presence so strong, I woke up shaking. And then I heard it." He looked at Benny, voice barely above a whisper. The voice said, "Jonathan, my son, tell Benny his time on big stages is over. I'm calling him out of the lights and into the shadows." Benny started shaking. His hands gripped the chair. "Away from crusades?" he whispered. "But Lord, people get healed at those meetings. How can the shadows be greater?" Jonathan nodded slowly. "The voice knew you'd say that," he said. "It said, Benny thinks his power comes from the size of his crowds, but I'm calling him to a kind of influence that can't be seen by human eyes." Then Jonathan dropped the biggest truth of all. He said, Pastor Hinn, God's calling you to be a secret missionary, to go to places where folks worship in basements, in caves, in old warehouses, places where just singing about Jesus could get them killed. No more TV shows, no more big arenas, no more book deals or fancy fees. Just you, serving people who risk their lives to follow Christ. Benny's voice cracked. But my ministry reaches the whole world, he said. How can God ask me to trade that for something so small, so hidden? Jonathan leaned in close, eyes full of love and fire. Because, Pastor, he said, what's small to us might be the biggest thing in God's eyes. Jonathan looked at Benny, his voice soft but steady. Pastor, he said, I know it's a lot. I know it feels impossible, but the voice wasn't done. He took a deep breath, then continued. It said Benny will feel like he's losing everything, but really he's stepping into something greater. His crusades, they reach folks who already believe. But this new calling, it's for people who are suffering, people who are risking their lives just to worship. The whole arena was so quiet, you could hear Benny breathing, shallow, shaky, like the weight of it all was pressing down on him. My whole life, Benny said, voice cracking, is built around crusades. My team, my ministry, thousands of people depend on it. Millions watch. How do I just walk away? Tears filled his eyes. The crowd could feel it. This wasn't just a moment. It was a shift. Jonathan leaned in, gentle but firm. The voice said your identity comes from what you do, but God's calling you to find out who you really are. Strip away the stage, the fame, the success, and what's left is a man after God's heart, a man who'll find his greatest joy serving the ones nobody sees. He paused, letting the words sink deep. God said that in exactly 35 days, you'll get a sign so clear, so impossible to ignore, you'll know this calling is real. Benny looked up, eyes full of tears. What kind of sign? He asked. What happens in 35 days? Jonathan's voice dropped low, like he was carrying the weight of heaven itself. The sign, he said, involves someone you love more than life, someone who don't even believe in miracles. Benny sat forward, heart pounding. Your nephew Michael, Jonathan said, he's going to call you, and what he tells you, it'll shake everything you thought you knew. Benny's eyes went wide. Michael? But he don't believe in any of this. He's never seen a miracle. Jonathan nodded, tears in his own eyes. That's why God chose him. The voice said, I will speak to the skeptic so the believer cannot doubt. Then Jonathan shared the dream. Michael will see you in a tunnel, underground, surrounded by people speaking Mandarin. You'll be praying for a little girl, blind since birth, and as you pray, light will come from your hands. She'll open her eyes, she'll see. Benny gasped, hands covering his mouth. It was too specific, too real. But here's what makes it undeniable, Jonathan said. Michael will hear you say 3 words in Mandarin, words he don't know, words he'll repeat to you perfectly. Jonathan paused. Then he said the words, Yesu I and I. Jesus loves you? Benny's breathing got fast. His whole body trembled. His nephew speaking Mandarin in a dream about underground ministry in China? It was too much, too perfect, too divine. This is impossible, Benny whispered. Jonathan looked at him, eyes full of compassion. Pastor Hinn, he said, that's exactly why it's real. Jonathan looked at Benny, voice barely holding together. Pastor, he said, the voice told me that when Michael calls you with that dream, he's going to say something that'll break your heart, but also prove this is real. Jonathan's voice cracked, tears spilling down his face. He'll say that in the dream, he saw joy on your face, not the kind that comes from big crowds or loud applause, but the kind that comes from serving folks who got nothing. And in that moment, he understood what real purpose looks like. Then Jonathan said the words that hit Benny like a tidal wave. Michael will tell you he wants to give his life to Jesus because in that dream, he saw what true ministry looks like through you. Benny couldn't hold it in. His whole body folded over, shoulders shaking, sobs pouring out like a flood. This was too much. Michael's salvation, that had been the family's prayer for over 20 years. And now the one who never believed was going to surrender because of a dream. I can't, Benny gasped, struggling to breathe. His voice was broken, shattered. 50 years of ministry, millions of lives. Thousands of people depend on this. And now you're asking me to give it all up for tunnels and hidden churches I ain't never seen? His words fell apart, like pieces of a man crushed under the weight of heaven's call. Pastor Osteen reached over, gently putting a hand on Benny's shoulder. The whole arena watched, 50,000 people, millions on TV, as one of the most powerful ministers in the world broke down in front of them. Not from failure, but from the sheer force of God's purpose. And what happened next? It'll leave you speechless. Benny Hinn, who'd seen thousands of miracles, who'd preached to nations, was now sobbing like a child, shaken under the weight of a call that went deeper than anything he'd ever known. Jonathan couldn't stay in his seat. He got up, walked over, and knelt beside Benny, put a gentle hand on his shoulder, and in that moment, the whole crowd saw something they'd never forget. Two men, one broken, one burdened, both surrendered. And that's what real ministry looks like? Jonathan leaned in close, his voice soft but full of heaven's comfort. Pastor Hinn, he said, the voice gave me words just for this moment. Words to help you breathe again. Benny looked up, tears still falling, eyes full of pain and confusion. How do I do this, Jonathan? He asked. How do I walk away from everything I've built? My wife, my team, all the people who count on this ministry? Jonathan's voice changed. It carried weight, like it wasn't just him speaking anymore. Pastor, he said, the voice told me Suzanne's been praying. Not for more crusades or more TV shows, but for something deeper. She's been asking God to give your marriage a bigger purpose, something eternal. Benny broke down again. He knew it was true. Suzanne had been praying different lately, with fire, with urgency, and now he understood why. But what about the ministry? Benny whispered. All the people who work with us? What happens to them? Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. The voice said God will take care of every single one. Those meant to keep the crusades going? They'll be led to other anointed leaders. And those called to follow you into the shadows? They'll hear that call loud and clear. The arena stayed silent, sacred, like heaven itself was listening. Pastor, Jonathan said, the voice told me something beautiful. It said your whole ministry, every healing, every miracle, every lesson was training. Training for this new calling, for the underground church, for the places where faith costs everything. Benny sat up straighter, his face still wet, but now there was something new in his eyes. A spark. Training, he whispered. 50 years. Was training for something greater? Jonathan nodded. Yes, Pastor. The voice said persecuted believers don't need lights or big stages. They need someone who's seen God's power for real, someone who can remind them that the same God who heals in arenas, heals in basements. He helped Benny stand. The crowd watched in silence as the man who'd preached to millions stood shakily, like he was stepping into a whole new world. Pastor, Jonathan said, this calling ain't taking you away from ministry. It's promoting you to your highest ministry. Benny wiped his eyes, his breathing slowed. His voice came back. If this is real, he said, then I'm about to start the most terrifying and amazing journey of my life. He looked out at the crowd, then into the cameras, and he spoke to the world. 50 years ago, Benny said, I thought I knew what it meant to serve God. I built crusades. I prayed for the sick. I saw miracles. But tonight, I see it different. Everything I've done was preparing me for something I never imagined. He paused. His voice cracked, but he kept going. To everyone watching, this ain't a show. It ain't a stunt. This is real. This is a man being changed by a truth I can't explain and won't deny. In 35 days, he said, my nephew Michael will call me. And when he does, I'll know. I'll know that God is real, that his plans are bigger than mine. Jonathan stood too, tears streaming down his face. Benny turned to him, eyes full of gratitude and holy fire. "Jonathan," he said, "you got a message you never wanted to give. And I got a call and I never wanted to hear. But I've learned something in all these years. When God says jump, you don't argue about the landing." Benny took a deep breath. His voice was strong now, steady, ready. And the whole world watched as a man surrendered everything to gain what he never knew he needed. Benny stood there, holding Jonathan close, tears still streaking down his face. But now they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of surrender, of peace, of purpose. He pulled back, looked Jonathan in the eyes and said, "Thank you for obeying. You didn't just deliver a message. You helped me find the courage to say yes." The crowd stayed silent, like the whole arena was wrapped in a holy hush. Folks weren't just watching a moment. They were witnessing a miracle. A man who'd spent 50 years preaching and healing, now stepping into the unknown with nothing but faith. Benny turned back to the crowd, his voice strong now. "I came here tonight thinking I was at the top of my ministry, but God showed me I was just getting started." He pointed to the sky, eyes full of fire. "If God can call me out of the lights and into the shadows, He can call you too. Don't be afraid of the unknown. Don't be afraid to lose what you built, because what He gives in return, it's worth more than anything you could ever imagine." The crowd erupted, not in wild cheers, but in reverent applause. People were crying, praying. Some were kneeling right there in the aisles. And as the cameras kept rolling, Benny Hinn, one of the most known faces in Christian ministry, walked off that stage not as a celebrity preacher, but as a servant ready to follow Jesus into the places no spotlight ever reaches. Jonathan followed close behind. The weight of his assignment lifted, replaced by the quiet joy of obedience. And somewhere in Toronto, a man named Michael was just days away from a dream that would change everything. If this message stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to show your support. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear how this spoke to you.